Okay, let's look into an article here about Ashkenazi Jews, mysterious origins unraveled by scientists thanks to ancient DNA. This was done towards the end of last year. It's done by Aaron L. Hike. I'd like to mention, just, off linguistics wise, Aaron has to do with Aryan, and El was the god of the Canaanites of the area that's there, and you can find it in your Bible where they talk about Chapel and Temple, Angel, Gabriel, Raphael, Ariel. The name of God is El, and it was around all the people around this area. So to claim that your God in your book is named El, whenever everybody surrounding you has a God named El, is quite conspicuous. In fact, past the point of conspicuousness. Now, Hike is the warrior, which is seen up in the northern Georgian area, and through there, Hike was a great warrior known to have killed off ancient Nimrod, although in the Bible it acts like Jacob had done it, and this is the reason that in the Jacob and Esau story, supposedly, of how he just so easily, for a bowl of soup, gives up his inheritance, in a way. But then also there's the oddity later where his own mother helps him to deceive their ailing, blind father before he dies, so he can put the blessing on them, as if the people didn't already know who was the firstborn or anything like that. And so he fakes him out with a goat skin and silly stuff like that. But Hike, if you just look up Hike, H-A-I-K, you will see where that comes from, and it might have an idea where the Hyksos type people had come down from too, that you hear about in ancient Egypt, which are the only people that come anywhere close to being similar to the idea of Exodus. But we'll get there in a little bit. I haven't even begun yet. Here you can see the top of an elder Jewish temple, but this is in Rome. Now, where do the Jewish people come from? This is a question that anthropologists, historians, and theologians have studied for millennia. Well, it doesn't take too much knowledge and thought if you look into the Bible and figure it out that Abraham came from Ur. And so Ur is in Sumeria, and that's where this ancient story comes from. And if you get into Sumerian, you'll find out that they had Utnapishtim, a Noah themselves, told by God, Enki, to build the boat, and so on, to save all of humankind. And even whenever it floods and does the thing which was 15 cubits deep, which is exactly what's described in the Bible, right before they say it goes over the mountaintops, if you cut out that sentence, it's the exact same story. In fact, the end of the Sumerian story has the deal where he releases a dove and a raven and so on, and comes back with muddy feet, and then they realize land is come and all this type of thing. It really parallels it quite a bit. In fact, I've got a series I've done recently that shows you the exacting parallels of Sumerian beliefs of creation and how that goes along with the Bible and the biblical story and the flood and all of those things, and how it came from Sumeria. Indeed, Abraham was known to have gone across the river and then been called Ivri, and Ivri refers to this crossing of the river. This refers to a branch of a river, a new thing. This is a type of typology, and here we're seeing one of the very first origins of it in the Bible, where you cross a river and something decent happens. Abraham does it later. Jacob crosses the Jordan. Whenever they get out of Exodus, they cross the Red Sea, which really is written Reed Sea in the Bibles, but people don't even know that. If you look it up in ancient Jewish, it actually doesn't say Red Sea anywhere. It says Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf. And the Yam Suf is the Sea of Reeds that were crossed. And whenever you look in the Hyksos thing, they had run through the Sea of Reeds, and when chased down by chariots, they bogged down in the Sea of Reeds. One story recounts that they set the reeds on fire as they took off, and this caused mass chaos, and it was able to let them free and done. Some of the story says that they had taken quite a bit of the wealth from that part of Egypt whenever they left, and their accruedness, and this finding out about this is what pissed off the Pharaoh, and he went after him. But the whole idea of being the biblical people and how many millions there supposedly are and all this exaggerated numbers, people have figured out a long time ago that if you had 4 people side by side walking in military form, and you had that many people leaving Egypt, that by the time they got to Sinai, there would still be people lining up to get in line to leave Egypt. And then you couldn't sustain anybody like that, so they came up with this idea of manna from heaven. But I've gone into depth on what that really goes into too, and I don't want to in this one, but let's just suffice to say that you couldn't have that many million people wandering around in a deserted area and be able to sustain themselves in the way that it was supposedly said. People, many theologians nowadays say that this was a small ragtag fleet of people and nowhere near the millions that are supposedly touted doing so. Now, according to mythology, the Judeans descended from three patriarchs, which are Abram, his son that was supposed to have been sacrificed, but then not Isaac, and then it leads into Jacob. So we have this typology situation that happens again. Now, Isaac, as I've shown, have to go with the Isaac and Kurgan burials of the ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans, which are just above the Sumerians on the top of Anatolia right now, but also leading all the way into China and all the way into the upper parts of Europe. Now, they are all buried in the cave of the Patriarchs and the cave of Machpelah. Now, that's in Hebron, and if you look into the story, they had to go buy that land from somebody else. That land was somebody else's. And so whenever they claim this Canaanite land, that happens later, but there already are endemic Canaanites in that area. Interestingly, the ancient Phoenicians, which are shown to be dotted a few places, and people call it that way, actually, their name that they have for themselves was Canaan, K-A-N-A-A-N, and therefore the Canaanites that we talk about and the Phoenicians really are one and the same, an endemic people that lived around there, but during that time, where did they come from before? Well, I've gone into that with my Phoenician vids and so on, but let's just continue on with this. Now, Hebron is a Palestinian city and a World Heritage Site located on the southern bank, 19 miles south of Jerusalem. And so this was supposed to have been the burial place, and I'm guessing that somehow you're supposed to believe that if they bought a cave to bury somebody in, then they bought all of Israel, and that's not the way that it went down in any way, shape, or form. If you look at the Bible, they tried repeatedly to take over the area, and they're unable to do so, and then God at the very end sends a wasp, and it cleans everybody out, and then they're allowed to go into the area. This is a sign of Vespa and Vespasian, and the sign of the Romans coming in and stuff at the end of the Greek reign and things like that. And people have seen this connection too, but not a lot of people put all of the connections together. Still, buried alongside them in that tomb are said to be Adam and Eve themselves, and the four matriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. Oddly, in the stories of Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel, and so on, that seems to be they're almost having a competition on who can have the children that add up to the 12 tribes of Israel. There's a strange story where Rachel and Leah actually trade some mandrake that her son's been growing, so it's almost like a dope trade to be able to spend the night with Jacob again, because she's become barren, but then she gets the mandrake. Now, mandrake was known as the love apple, and there's ancient stories about how you put it under the bed and the woman can become pregnant and just all these things. Plus, there's medicines and drugs you can make out of this, and too much will kill you. And done in the right ways, you have certain effects too. So there's that leads into play. But of course, now that has root knowledge and magic crap in the Bible and stuff, and trading people for drugs. So that just sounds kind of odd. But when you read up the story, it's like she became barren, so to make it all happen, in fact, she lets her handmaiden have kids and stuff too, and that makes up part of the tribes of Israel. Anyhow, the cave has never been excavated, but probably should be for just reality's sake. But then off the sacredness, people are very against that. But on top of it is a relatively modern building. It's a mid-first century building which Herod the Great built, and likely to honor his own ancestors. For a more scientific take on the Jewish origin debate, though, recent DNA analysis of Ashkenazi Jews, a Jewish ethnic group from up north, revealed that their maternal line is actually European. Yep. So much of this DNA of the Middle East is showing up to be European, and I've told you years ago why that is, and why you're going to find ancient, before we got good at this, to where you're going to find some of the Egyptian DNA comes up into Europe. I'm positive of it. And then now we're finding out, well, King Tut came out and they said, hey, they match all these European people and Anatolian people, and there we go again. So they're related to each other. They're cousins, things like this, long distant cousins, if you want to look at it that way. It's also been found that their DNA only has 3% ancient ancestry from that area, which links them to the Middle Eastern Mediterranean area, also known as the Middle East. Now, namely Israel, Lebanon, parts of Syria, and western Jordan. So you would think that it would match that, but I've just discussed how the Canaanites are going to be the people that match that. The people that are coming in probably won't match that so much. And the idea of of Abraham having left after the gods become false gods, or the fact that it did flood again, after God said it would never flood again, it did flood again. You remember he gave a rainbow and said that would never happen? Well, Sumeria flooded again, bad to the point that it killed a lot of people off and so on, and then that caused a secondary dispersal. The first dispersal that came out of that ran over into Egypt and other things, and I've shown that in recent videos, the Shemsu-Hor and the followers of Horus. And you can even see the falcon god in the ancient Sumerians holding the pine cone doing the plant. And then there's that falcon idea. Falconry goes all the way through the Proto-Indo-Europeans and up into Europe. And I think we well are aware of falconry and where that kind of comes along at. But so this part of the world, the Jewish people are said to have originally came from, according to the Old Testament. But no, not really. They were supposed to have been perhaps Sumerians, that Ivri came across a river and did their thing. Later you find Jacob Ivri going across the Jordan, using the Ark of the Covenant to do so and part the waters, really mimicking, again, exactly that typology of crossing the Red Sea, crossing a river. Abraham crossed a river. Here we go. We crossed a river to get out, or not a river, but an actual ocean. And now we crossed the Sea of Reeds, and it really isn't even a sea. It's a sea of reeds. But they crossed that, and then you have that. Jesus also has the same typology whenever he comes in to connect him to Moses and all these things too. And he has that same similar typology where he starts out and then 40 days in the wilderness and all this, and 440 years in the wilderness and all these things. People have noticed these connections long, long ago. It's a typology. It keeps happening over and over again. So it's easily recognizable somewhat, and you're like, oh, it seems to be an edict. It just keeps happening. Wow. So the odd thing that here is that the Jewish people are said to have originally come from that area, but according to the Old Testament, but 3% is a minuscule amount and is similar to what Europeans as a whole share with Neanderthals, and just a small minuscule amount that almost can't show up in your genetics somehow. So that's strange too, but it does show you they do have some interaction with those people. There's no purity exactly in that situation. But so given that the genetic ancestry link is so low, Ashkenazi Jews' most recent ancestors must be from elsewhere. Another thing that people don't seem to understand about these names and things, and a lot of these are very symbolic, Ashkenazic, okay? So when you look up ash, and Phoenix rose from the ash, and Israel was destroyed, and then this rose from the ashes, and that type of concept comes out of this, so this Phoenix idea, but that's Phoenicians, and that's really not these people at all. But there's that word. Then you also have Nazi, written right there in the word Nazi, written right in the word Ashkenazi. Okay, we're just going to leave that alone though. Anyhow, their Jews' most recent ancestors must be from elsewhere. Not one, but many tribes we'll look into. To understand why this is the case, we need to go back in time to look at where those other early ancestors came from. It starts in Persia, modern-day Iran, during the 6th century. This is where most of the world's Jews were living at the time, it tries to say. The tolerance of the Persians, encouraged by the Jews to adopt Persian names, Persian words, traditions, and religious practices, and climb up the social ladder, gaining a monopoly on trade. They also converted other people who were living along the Black Sea to their Jewish faith. These are the Ashkenazi areas. This helped to expand their global network. Now, among these converts were the Alans, which are Iranian nomadic pastoral people up north, some Greeks, the Slavs, where slavery comes from, who resided along the southern shores of the Black Sea. Now, upon conversion, they translated the Old Testament into Greek, built synagogues, and continued expanding the Jewish trade network that was there. Indeed, the Greeks of that time had Sol Invictus, the undying sun god, and Jesus seemed to match that so perfectly. So it's the oddity, and that people don't really understand what happened, is that the Romans were over this area and not going to have their crap. And then all of a sudden, boom, they revert to the religion. Why does that happen? Well, because Vespa is the wasp of the Old Testament. And what did that clean out the area for? Well, it cleaned out the area for God's Son to come in. Oh, that's Jesus. No, it was Titus. Titus came in just as Jesus told about. See, Jesus died in 33 AD, and exactly 40 years or a generation biblically later, pretty much to the day, Titus finished off the Jewish revolt war that was there. It started in 66 AD in the 6th month on the 6th day. So that might give you some indication of, for those who have wisdom, please count that number. But above that, it lasted for 7 years, which sounds biblical, that 7 years of trials and tribulations. Then what happened? Well, Armageddon, this mountain people that got chased to and then ended off the end of the struggle. That's Armageddon itself. And Josephus recounts the fact that no stone was left standing, just as Jesus had stated before, standing in front of the temple. You see this temple here? Not a stone will be left standing. They will surround the wall and do all these things. Well, who did all that? Well, that was the Romans. They did all that then. It's amazing. There's a story that's built into that too that says that a woman, while they were starving to death, a woman named Mary sacrificed her own son named Yahshua as a last Passover meal so they could wait for a man that was coming named Emmanuel, not Jesus, Emmanuel. And in that fact, he became the Easter sacrifice. Matching up in the story to this exact timing, which you'd find in the Bible, Jesus says to eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, and it always comes across as some strange cannibalistic ritual, but those are definitely connected. Now, these Jews adapted the name Ashkenaz, and the DNA of Ashkenazi Jews can be traced to ancient Ashkenaz, an intersection of trade routes in eastern Turkey. And so it's way up here leading into the Proto-Europeans, and this trade route, I'm telling you, way before the time of Alexander, had the Silk Road going on. There are ancient pharaohs before this time that have silk in their bindings and so on. Yeah, I've also done a video where they found cocaine and tobacco in them, and those are both New World products too, but that's probably for another video. But then you see the Ashanas here. You see Ashkenaz, right? And Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz. So this idea of ancient Ashkenaz of being up in high Turkey and Anatolia type of area. Now, the DNA of Yiddish speakers could have originated from 4 ancient villages in northwest Turkey. It's possible that they come out of that area. The rise of the Ashina. We now know that at the time of these Jews adopted the name of Ashkenaz, they also acquired unique Asian mutations in their Y chromosomes. This is where another important group of people in our story come into play. They're called the Gökturks, and they're the Turkish steppe people that come all the way from close to China. During the 6th century, these nomadic people were ruled by a Siberian Turkic tribe called the Ashina. They were forced by the Chinese Tang Empire, who were in power in China at the time, to migrate westwards towards the Black Sea. And Asherah and Ashina go together quite well. Asherah is the God's wife. For if you'll look up Yahweh, just Google image Yahweh and his Asherah, and it'll show you the bull god of the Levant, El, Yahweh, and his wife Asherah, and their son Baal. Yeah, that Baal, but that's a different thing. Just like the Egyptians had a giant pantheon and then tried to turn it into just the sun god, so did other religions, and the sun-worshipping people were all the Proto-Indo-Europeans that originated a lot of this. It goes on for people from way back before recorded time were sun worshippers, and they understood that it's a natural concept, of course, on a planet like ourselves, realizing that the sun does cause a lot of things to happen, and it was our overseer. Indeed, it's what kind of made everything that's around you, and you can kind of see that. It grows from the sun. The sun dries up things, and so waters are separated, and all these biblical concepts. It also goes back to a sun god type of worship. Now, thanks to their organizational and military skills, the Ashina united many tribes in this area in a new empire called the Khazar Plantagenet was born. Offering freedom of worship and taxing trade, these people quickly rose to power in that area. The Asian group of these DNA mutations found in the Ashkenazi Jews likely originated from the Ashina elite and other Khazar clans who converted from Shamanism to Judaism or blended the two together with that sun god idea, which Jesus is a sun god, Sol Invictus is a sun god, Mithras is a sun god, Ra is a sun god. Anyhow, this means that the Ashina and the core Khazar clans were absorbed by the Ashkenazi Jews. It's also around this time that the Jewish elite adopted many Slavic customs. And based on my previous research, I'd suggest that Yiddish was developed as a secret language to assist in trade. Well, I'd also tell you that Yiddish is actually Germanic. They'll make a mention here, I believe, in it somehow and just throw a slight edge, but what are people in this area having Germanic language for? No, it shows you a lot of enveloping interaction here that people nowadays don't seem to think happened back then. And I'm telling you that it definitely did in quite some way. These trade routes and things were well in play. And the Phoenicians' interaction with everybody around the Mediterranean and more. So, it's not necessarily a secret language in trade, but it's actually a German. Yiddish is where it comes from. What happened next was the Jewish empire began to collapse. By the 10th century, the Jews on the Black Sea migrated to the Ukraine and Italy. Yiddish became the lingua franca of these Ashkenazi Jews and absorbed German words while maintaining the Slavic grammar. How could they obtain German words when Germany's way the hell over there? What is this concept we're supposed to be thinking of here? Where are the meetings of these people going on? What's happening? Let's continue. As the global trade moved to the hands of the Italians, Dutch, and English, way over that way, the Jews were pushed aside apparently when this all happened. What this all shows is that using modern genetic technology that enables scientists to track the past of modern day people, and a new appreciation for Jewish ancestry can be discovered. It has meant a greater understanding of the journey of these people took to arrive in Europe itself, and has also allowed for the increasing knowledge as the significant role of the Ashina and the Khazar clans, from which some of the real Jewish patriarchs actually come from, played. It also shows you a portion of where the idea of these 10 tribes come from, and the 10 tribes and their dispersal comes from. When one looks at the table of nations, you'll see it all blends up into this area that's over here, and the ancient people have said, well, this is Gog, this is Magog, this is that. There we go. Here's where Isaac works into, and Isaac has to do with Isaac and his sons, the Isaac and Kurgan burials, and then you have Isaac's sons, which are Saxons, and that connection that goes to there. So the Sakasuni and the ancient Proto-Indo-Europeans got around a lot more than people know about. In fact, most people don't even know about them. So, kind of neat there. So, this article was published on a place called The Conversion, or The Conversation, I'm sorry, and The Conversion. But, yeah, so where does that DNA leave us? Well, there are a lot of DNA things that are out that's showing you the Jewish thing, and they'll show you it breaks down haplogroups and things. It didn't get into that complexness here. It was really just more straightforward, but also I was able to vamp over on the top of it and give you a lot more flesh of feeling out that people will not give when discussing any of this religion. And it's just taboo to look into the reality of it all, I guess. But anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. And so there's one, Ashkenazi Jews. Enjoy.